Ferrari arrived in Baku with the illusion of redeeming himself and ended up starring in one of the biggest recent humiliations in Formula One. ASF cars slow and unpredictable left in. Evidence all the technical deficiencies of the Maranello project. Hamilton and Leclerc saw. Wrapped in chaos of non-compliance equipment, tense radios, and open frustration. The Italian press reacted furiously, demolving headlines that speak of shame, betrayal, and structural crisis in the Scuderia. Ferrari arrived in Baku with illusion and was destroyed. The classification was chaos of strategies. Divided that left Hamilton out of Q2 and Leclerc conditioned from the beginning. In the race, the SF20-5 confirmed all its shortcomings, motor failures for Leclerc, lack of rhythm. In front of McLaren and Red Bull, and poorly managed team orders that ended up in betrayal. Internal, Leclerc's filtered radios showed the fracture between what is said in public and what is. He feels private, and the Italian press reacted furiously. The headlines talked about shame, of betrayal, and a broken team inside. Azerbaijan disaster was not just sports, it was an image crisis that left the naked Scuderia in front of Italy. Ferrari landed in Baku with the moral obligation to hit the table after a start of disappointing season. V were of hard criticism weeks, but the good feelings. In free practices they fed some hope in Italy. Hamilton led FP2 Leclerc. He continued closely, and in Maranello he breathed illusion. However, optimism was transformed in a cruel mirage. At the key moment, the classification became an absolute chaos. With 6 red flags, and Ferrari showed the worst possible face, divided strategies, confusing communication, and mistakes that left Hamilton out of Q2 and mortgaged Leclerc. For the race, what should be the turning point ended up being the confirmation of a project that does not know how to react under pressure. The 20-5 SF, far from confirming its potential, showed all its miseries in the layout. Urban, the car already indicated during the season for its very performance became ungovernable in changing conditions. While McLaren and Red Bull, they found solutions to adapt, Ferrari was caught in a technical limbo, without straight speed and without curve traction. The numbers were devastating, losing more. A second by return with respect to the head. The Italian press had no mercy and described it as a useless car to compete for victories. What should be an evolution, transformed into a visible humiliation return to return. The sports drama combined with human chaos. In the race, Leclerc suffered a loss. Intermittent power that left him defenseless in lines, while Hamilton was involved in a mess of poorly executed equipment orders. The instruction was clear, to advance Leclerc to attack Norris and, if it didn't work, return the position. But the Briton did not comply, crossing the goal 4 tenths ahead of Monegasco. In public, it was minimized as an error of judgment, but in private Leclerc exploded by radio, qualifying the situation as unfair and absurd. These leaks fed the feeling of betrayal within the team. The consequence was devastating for the image of the Scuderia. What would have been handled with discretion, today it was exposed in real time and amplified by the press. From your own country. In Italy, the headlines were implacable. The Gazzetta dello Sport spoke of total disaster, the stamp of broken team inside, and Il Giornale directly accused Ferrari to lose course under Fred Vasseur. It was no longer a bad result, but a publicly indicated structural crisis on each cover. The Azerbaijan Grand Prix 2020-5 was recorded as a black chapter for Ferrari, not only for poor performance, but for the confusion show, internal betrayal, and lack of course. The Italian press, traditionally criticism, went beyond sports. He became a national scandal, a symbol of decay in Maranello's house. The echo of those covers it still resonates in a team that seems caught between the immediate and the uncertainty of his future. Ferrari's disaster in Baku began long before the flag of paintings. The Saturday classification was a cruel reflection of a structural lax that the team for years, with 6 red flags that interrupted the session, the Scuderia. He demonstrated his historic difficulty in reacting under pressure. While McLaren and Red Bull managed to reorganize to take advantage of the key moments, Ferrari became entangled in his own confusion. They opted to divide strategies in Q2. Charles Leclerc came out with tires. Media and Lewis Hamilton with soft. The result was embarrassment. Leclerc made an error. In Curve 1, he caused yellow flags and ruined Hamilton's quick lap, which he had. That abort. The British was eliminated in Q2, a very hard blow for a 7 times world champion who had led training the previous day. The Italian press did not forgive. Corriere dello Sport spoke of unworthy strategic chaos of Ferrari, and the Repubblica described him as an amateur management. The criticisms were not limited to error of the pilots, but to the lack of coordination in the wall. Once again, Ferrari showed that he does not know how to read the classification context when it becomes a chess game of seconds. That inability to manage the unpredictable is what Italian media they point out as a symptom of structural weakness, not as an isolated accident. On Sunday, the situation got worse. Charles Leclerc suffered problems in the power unit. In the first laps, the loss of energy recovery reduced in almost 3 kilometers per hour its peak speed, leaving it helpless every time he tried to advance in line. Failure in the ERS was intermittent, appeared and disappeared without explanation, but enough as to ruin any possibility of competing. Ferrari later confirmed that the system, SF Batteries 20-5, had failed again, the same problem that had already appeared in Budapest. The Gazzetta dello Sport defined it as a car that breaks when I lack the most. In parallel, Hamilton loaded with the frustration of a disastrous classification and a career without rhythm. Ferrari tried to save something with team orders. They asked Leclerc to let go, to the British to attack Norris. Charles immediately fulfilled with the promise that yes, Lewis did not progress, would return the position. But in the last lap, despite the clear order of his engineer, Hamilton did not execute the exchange, crossed the goal just 4/10 in front, leaving Leclerc 9th instead of 8th. The internal pact broke. In official interviews, Leclerc fell importance to the incident, saying that he worried in 8th or 9th place. But in the filtered radios, his tone was very different. He described the situation as stupid and unfair, and made it clear that he felt betrayed. The contradiction between its public facade and its private anger fed the media fire. In Italy, the headlines were fierce. Il Giornale published, "Ferrari does not respect his house pilot." The problem was not just losing minor points, but the perception of a team uncoordinated, unable to execute even the basics. The wrong classification, the failures, technicians, and unfulfilled orders left a devastating portrait. Ferrari does not compete against McLaren or Red Bull, competes against their own mistakes. The 20-5 SF is the reflection of a problem that Ferrari fails to solve for years. A competitive car in very specific conditions, but unable to give up when the track. It demands versatility. In Baku, that weakness was naked. The data were clear. While the Red Bull of Verstappen marked consistent times, Ferrari lost between 1 and 2 seconds per return in the race. In front of McLaren, the difference was more than a second. That was humiliating for a team that aspired to fight for victories. The Italian press was not limited to criticizing the result, but also pointed to the concept of the car. The technical analysis revealed that the root of the problem was not in the suspension or in the gearbox, but on the aerodynamic map. Matteo Bobbi explained it to Sky Sport. The SF 20-5 only works in the tip of a triangle, in a very narrow range of height and load. Aerodynamics. When it leaves that strip, the loss of load is brutal, and the car becomes unstable. That explains why in Baku, with its long, straight, and slow curves, the Ferrari he became a nightmare for Leclerc and Hamilton. The most worrying thing is that the updates introduced by Ferrari not only they solved the problem, but worsened it. The new aerodynamic package and modifications in the rear suspension sought to give it more stability, but they broke the harmony between mechanical and aerodynamic. The result was an unpredictable car which it forces engineers to constantly work outside the optimal window. The Gazzetta dello Sport described it as a car that is not understood even in Maranello. In Baku, Ferrari brought only small updates focused on brake cooling. They were minor changes designed to survive the circuit, not to transform the car. It was read in Italy as the confirmation that SF 20-5 is at the limit of its development. Fred Vasseur had already admitted that much of the resources were allocated to Project 2, 1020-6, leaving the current car artificial. For the press, the conclusion was lapidaria. Ferrari has abandoned the season. The comparison with his rivals was painful. McLaren evolved a quick car and consistent, capable of adapting to different clues. Red Bull, despite ups and downs, a solid concept. Ferrari, on the other hand, was caught in erratic design, unable to give trust to your pilots. In the words of Corriere dello Sport, it is not a racing car, it is a drift laboratory. What transformed a bad weekend into Baku into a real scandal were not only the technical problems of SF20-5, but the filtration of internal radios and the subsequent reaction of the Italian press. Charles Leclerc, who in public had shown his usual diplomacy by saying that an 8th or 9th place does not change anything, in private, exploded. In filter communications, he left very hard phrases. It's simply stupid. Because it's not fair, but I don't care. Enjoy that 8th place. These words, they showed a frustrated Leclerc, convinced that Hamilton had not respected the agreement, internal to return the position in the last round. The Italian press collected that contradiction between public serenity and private rage as a bomb. The Gazzetta dello Sport titled, Leclerc Betrayed. The Stampa talked about a team broken inside, while Il Giornale went further. Hamilton imposes his law, humiliated Leclerc. What until then was a tactical discussion about orders from team became a narrative of internal division, lack of leadership, and an environment toxic within the Scuderia. The final scene of the Grand Prix was symbolic. Hamilton crossed the goal in 8th position, just 4/10 ahead of Leclerc, in an absurd fight that was not worth points important, but left deep scars. For Italian media, it was the confirmation of that Ferrari is not even able to execute the most basic. Not only do they lose in front of McLaren, and Red Bull also loses themselves. That dramatic turn made Baku much more than a bad result. It was confirmation, public of Ferrari's internal fractures. And in Italy, where Scuderia is a matter national, the reaction was ruthless. The headlines did not talk about a bad day, they talked about shame, betrayal, and structural crisis.